evening from Los Angeles. We have been too often disappointed by the optimism of the American leaders both in Vietnam and Washington to have faith any longer in the silver linings they find in the darkest clouds, the Observer began exactly 38 years and 9 months ago tonight. To say that we are closer to victory today is to believe, in the face of the evidence, the optimists who have been wrong in the past. To suggest we are on the edge of defeat is to yield to unreasonable pessimism. To say that we are mired in stalemate seems the only realistic yet unsatisfactory conclusion. And the Observer's conclusion? It is increasingly clear to this reporter that the only rational way out will be to negotiate, not as victors, but as an honorable people who lived up to their pledge to defend democracy and did the best they could. Our fifth story on the countdown, after years of erring on the side of caution about Vietnam, Walter Cronkite, on February 27, 1968, truly matched his sign-off, and that's the way it is. And America never saw that war the same way. Wishing neither to make an undue analogy nor be too introspective, but on the advice of a panel of experts, NBC News and MSNBC have today decided to call it, in Iraq, the way it is, civil war. On the heels of sectarian violence on the ground in Iraq, in which more than 200 people lost their lives, the killing today continuing, police finding more than 75 bodies, victims of shootings and roadside bombings, the morgues already full. Against that backdrop, the president heading overseas this morning for the second time in as many weeks to meet with NATO allies and the Iraqi prime minister. His administration chafing at the decision of this news organization and some others to begin calling the violence in Iraq what it has been for many months now, even years, a civil war. Arguing that most of the bloodshed is contained in the capital city. From a White House statement today, the violence is primarily centered around Baghdad, and Baghdad's security and the increased training of Iraqi security forces is at the top of the agenda when President Bush and Prime Minister Maliki meet later this week in Jordan. In a moment, Jack Jacobs on the mechanics of the terminology. First, let me call in our own Craig Crawford, also, of course, a columnist for Congressional Quarterly. Craig, good evening.
Good evening.
Without navel-gazing too much here, we hope we'd be having this discussion if it had been ABC's call or CBS's. What do you think is the practical political importance of the decision to use these words in the mainstream media, civil war?
Well, it goes beyond NBC. I think the other news organizations who are joining this, we're going to see now news coverage that calls it what it is, and that is going to have an impact because I think the administration responded so intently to this because they know that once American people just really grapple with the fact that our troops are in the middle of a civil war that we can't control, the imperative to get out and get out sooner than later just gets even stronger.
Lord knows nobody who watches this program does not already know that you're the author of an excellent book called Attack the Messenger, How Politicians Turn You Against the Media. An administration saying it's not a civil war, a major mainstream news organization saying it is, and to describe it thusly henceforth. How do you expect the administration to respond? Does it turn to retribution in some way? Can we expect incoming here?
They already reacted swiftly in a statement attacking this new use of the word civil war. Let's look at what the administration wants to call it. They want to call it a new phase in sectarian violence. I don't think many Americans would go along with that attribution. And then, if these folks were designing road signs, Keith, they'd probably want to call a dead end sign outlet free or something. This is where I focused in my book so much is on the use of language, how Washington often uses language to conceal the truth rather than reveal it. I was just reading the federal government's report on hunger, concluding there is no hunger in America, only food insecurity. This sort of thing is all over the place, and I think it's the media's job to cut through it and call things what they are.
Yeah, as we've discussed many times, it looks like somebody read the book 1984 in a hurry and jotted down a few notes and did things like that. I mean, Bull Run would have been a new phase in North-South relations in 1861 or 62. But getting back to this point you raised this earlier, media-wise, can anybody put this genie back in the bottle? If you're at ABC or CBS or CNN or the Wall Street Journal, you have the NBC decision. There was a reference just matter-of-factly in the LA Times reporting from Iraq last Friday, referred to civil war, an editorial in the New York Times yesterday arguing for the use of the phrase. Do you not have to just let enough time pass and then adopt the language too, or you wind up looking like shills for the government?
I think so. I mean, at some point, some would argue the mainstream media has been very slow at doing this, but they've bent over backwards for a long time to try to give the administration its due and how they wanted things characterized. And, even on things like the coalition, calling it a coalition instead of U.S. Forces in Iraq. There's so many things that the media has tried to do to give the administration what they wanted, and I think now it's just changing, and it's long overdue.
And as important, lastly, is the very fact that the organization here is now calling this a civil war. Are the many hoops that essentially we had to jump through just as important? It wasn't enough for us to say, based on our reporting, it's raining outside. We had to bring in meteorologists and weather forecasters and everybody else, essentially. It would seem to be almost unprecedented for actual reporting to no longer be enough.
At some point, the media has to remember we serve the reading and viewing public and not the politicians. And so I think that, trying to, with a White House that continues to be in denial about these things. I mean, if this were the AA 12-step program, this White House hasn't even taken the first step, which is to acknowledge and define your problem. In that environment, the media, had to go through some of these hoops to justify what they've done, because we've got an administration that will not address what's actually going on in the ground and is always trying to blame the media or anyone else who characterizes it in ways they don't want it characterized.
Craig Crawford of MSNBC, Congressional Quarterly, and considerable research on how governments and media interact. As always, Craig, great thanks.
Yeah, it's a never-ending story, I'm afraid.
Indeed.